Shalom Alechem. We already spoke in the past about going into the water on Shabbat, that Sfaradim are more lenient and Ashkenazim are more machmir. Ashkenazim have a minhag that's brought down in the Ma'aril, the Magen Avraham, Mishnah Berurah brings it down in Shin Kaf Vav, that they don't go into the water like the pool, the ocean, or take bath, and that is because they're afraid of few isurim that could be when when going into the water, such as, for instance, squeezing your hair. So we're mentioning now a halacha that's more relevant to Sfaradim, since Sfaradim are permitted to go into the water, although some poskim say that it's correct not to go into the water, although it's permitted in order to prevent all kind of isurim, but that's for a different discussion. Lemaise, it's permitted, and therefore, how should one go into, let's say, the pool? He wants to go and refresh himself in a hot summer day and go into the pool. What bathing suit should he wear? We know the halacha says that shriyato zoi kibuso. If you take cloth and you soak it in water, it's considered as you washed it, and therefore it's isur of melaben, of cleaning, of washing. It's isur Torah. You're not allowed to take something and put it into the water. That is called melaben, cleaning. So over here we have a big machloket brought down in the Tur Siman Shin Bet, and the Bet Yosef in length brings all the Rishitot of the Rishonim. Some Rishonim hold that, such as Tosfot, that if you take cloth that is clean, you take, for instance, a shirt, you take, for instance, pants that are clean, and you put them in the water, that's not the prohibition, that is permitted, because you're not cleaning anything, it's clean already. Others, like the Rashbam, Rabbeinu Tam, hold that it's asur regardless to put anything in the water, even clean clothing, unless you're putting it in something that is dirty. Let's say you put it into wine, you put a shirt into wine, you're making it dirty, that's permitted. But to put it in clean water, that is restricted. What is halacha lemaaseh? The Rema brings both opinions, Siman Shin Bet Siftet, and in the second opinion he says to be osir, that it's correct to forbid, not to put any clothing into the water, even if they are clean. That is the halacha, seems to be according to the Rama for Ashkenazim. But for Sfaradim, we found in the Shulchan Aruch 4 psakim related to that, which he contradicts himself in those psakim. For instance, when we're dealing with Siman Shin Bet that we just mentioned, Sif Tet, he says clearly, Beged shesh alav lichluch asur. If a cloth has dirt, that is when you're not allowed to put it in water, indicating that if it's a clean clothing, you're allowed to put it into the water. And he repeats this as well in Siman Shin Yutet. He says that idea again, that as long as the clothing is clean, you're allowed to put it in the water. He says that מים שיש בהם תולעים מותר לשתות על ידי מפה בשבת. That is Siman Shin Yutet, Sif Tet Zayin, which means if you have a clothing that you want to drink water, but the water has in it bugs, so you can put the clothing to separate between you and the bugs, and this is the way you sift those bugs away, and it's not considered sifting, it's not borer. That is the halacha in Shin Yutet, that it's not borer, but he says clearly over here that you can use clothing and wet it in that water. How is that possible? The Mishnah Berurah over here mentions that this is what he said before in Shin Kaf. That is the opinion. But we found two other places that the Shulchan Aruch restrict using water. For instance, in Shin Yutet that we just learned, in a different halacha, in Siman Yud, in Seif Yud, he said, Sudar Mayim Asur Mishum Libun. You're not allowed to put clothing into the water, and it seems like it's clean clothing, you're not allowed to put them into the water. Same thing he says in Shin Lamed Daled, where over there we're talking about one that has fire, and on a piece of cloth, can he wet it? So over there, he's machriya, he says, Svarat Hasheni Mistabrim, which means the second opinion, which restricts, that seems to be the halacha, that is more correct. So there's a contradiction over here. What do we do when there's a contradiction? Mishnah Berurah already in Biur Halacha and Shin Bet. Over there in Seif Det, Biur Halacha brings down that contradiction, and he brings that the Magen Avraham was held that the Shulchan Aruch was lenient, and the Gra thought to be Oser, and also the Tosefet Shabbat. Lemaise, the Eliyahu Rabbah says that most Rishonim hold Lekula, to be lenient, and therefore it should be permitted, but since there are those that are Machmir, and also the Tur is Machmir, it's correct to be Machmir. So there's various opinions here of what to do. Also, in the later Achronim, there's Machloket, according to Chacham Ovadia, he feels that and learns that the Shulchan Aruch was lenient, and they all try to answer the Shulchan Aruch on the places that it seems to be restricting. And Rav Moshe Levi, on the other hand, wrote that the Shulchan Aruch was restricting and was aser, and he's explaining those psakim that seem to be lenient differently according to his opinion. So, lemaise, that's one machloket. But then, if one uses synthetic clothing, which means he doesn't use clothing made out of cotton, wool, whatever it is, that's natural fabric, but rather synthetic, something like those acrylic things, and which in reality different than natural fabric, because natural fabric, where you have, for instance, cotton, so the thread itself absorbs water, and this is how it's cleaned. The fabric itself and the thread itself absorbs water, but the synthetic ones, they don't absorb water. So if you have clothing out of it, the water goes in between the fabrics, but doesn't enter the threads themselves. So therefore, according to that, it should have been permitted. This is how the Shmirat Shabbat Gilchata writes. This is how the Sefer Aznit Berur of Zilber writes. This is how also Rav Moshe Levi writes in his Sefer. So Menuchat Ahava. So therefore, we have a machloket over here, because even there are those that restrict, like the Or Letzion, for example, that argues on the Shmirat Shabbat. He holds that it's not permitted to use even synthetic clothing. So it's a machloket. Since it's a machloket, you have two machlokot over here. So therefore, we can rely on the majority of the Rishonim that hold that if your clothing is clean and you use synthetic clothing, that is already like a a second opinion that would be permitted, because there are many poskim that permit synthetic clothing made not out of natural fabric, and therefore using such a shorts, for instance, such bathing suits that are not made out of such clothing that are natural would be permitted to use on Shabbat for those that are permitted to go into the pool.